completely bowled me over. I wanted to go to the Slade. Oddly enough, the sort of pressures and things that we had at King's were much stronger than at the Slade, where you were let to do whatever you want. Actually, in a way, a bit of a letdown, because one actually expected people to drive you harder or something, you know, because one had been so used to this. I'd become such a workaholic as a teenager, and suddenly a place where people sit around and drink tea, and a much nicer life, of course, but I mean, I was not quite prepared for it. The first thing was that I realised I wasn't such a good painter as I'd always thought. People really could draw in a way that I couldn't. And I was very well aware of that immediately, and I realised quite quickly that I was average. When I was about 22, I found myself around a friend's house, and a young American student, or a Canadian student, stayed over the night and got into bed with me. That was the split, and that had happened when I was 22, so which year is that? 1964. And then I'd run away to America, and I'd gone to New York, and I'd stayed with all these extraordinary gay priests who had all sort of jumped on me and virtually tried to rape me down in this North Henry Street mission. And I was horrified, and I got on my Greyhound, and I went to Calgary, where this friend of mine was. I got a job surveying the abattoirs of Calgary and various things. And then that was all too much. So down I went to San Francisco, where my parents had an old friend. And I got into the City Lights bookshop, and I bought all these banned books, including William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. And I worked out how I was going to smuggle it back into England. And I took off down hitchhiking, all the way down to Big Sur. And when I got there, I picked up this young student, I can remember his name now still, it's called Michael Sheets, and he rolled up a joint and gave me a whole lot of sort of grass to experiment with, and I went back to San Francisco, rolled it all up, and just went haywire during one afternoon. My wild time in New York. Off I went, and back to England. Everything had changed by the time I came back to the Slade. I came back to a sort of blank. And then eventually, during the course of that year, I met both Patrick Proctor and David Hockney and a whole group of younger gay artists. And then my life really changed. Slade just disappeared into the background. It became a place to paint, but actually my life shifted into this world, which was, of course, fascinating. David was at the height of his sort of fame. He was all over colour supplements, and just by being around, you met all these extraordinary people. And of course, it also led to a lot of jealousy amongst the other students at the Slade. You know, there was this whole network that opened up. Speaking in London was very, very strange, because obviously, if you put the clock back now, people would wonder what it was all about, because it was so little. Something like the ICA was a sort of incredible new place.
The measure of a country's self-confidence is the degree of freedom that it will give to creative intelligence.
There were these arts laboratories and sort of places that moved in and out of basements, and where films were shown, mostly American, so you could go and see a new Andy Warhol film. I mean, the first underground films I saw was Scorpio Rising, which was shown at Camberwell and expected to be raided by the police. So I saw Anger first. Now, this really interested me, I know, as a kid, and there was an incredible, because it was surreptitious. You know, these were the films that were shown in the really most interesting places. It was nothing to do with the cinema. They were the exciting places where you could go and spend, a whole day, if necessary, and there would be films. I came out and went onto the Dole, which at the time was not quite like it was now. It had considerable... You felt a bit like a leper. I went back to painting, and I developed my painting, which were these very, very calm landscapes. They were very 60s. White cotton duck canvas, Liquitec paint, which came from America, acrylics, and using masking tape to get sharp lines. All 60s conventions, but used in my paintings to construct sort of landscapes which were quite empty. And I've always thought since that they were like waiting for something to happen in them, because David had stolen the limelight. I mean, there were all these boys in bed and everything else, and you know, and it was all going on all over his pictures, and you couldn't do that because you were going to be a follower. Two things had happened. I'd moved out of the conventional world of rooms in Islington. And I moved into this old corset factory, which was opposite Blackfriars Bridge. Because I'd been to America again, and I'd seen lofts. And it was cost nothing. We had no baths or anything in it. We had about 16 lavatories because, you know, in rows. Had an enormous old heating system, and it was actually completely wonderful. The sun and space, and the light came in, and no one who here could believe it. It doesn't exist any longer. It's under that enormous tower block somewhere. The space became the centre of my life in a certain way because anyone who came into it was on a stage. Well, of course, I'd heard about the factory, but it wasn't the factory because I wasn't in Andy Warhol's situation. But, I mean, there was that feeling. I can never remember exactly which year it was. A theatre design student was sent to see me, and he brought a Super 8 camera into the studio and loaned it to me. And I just went around the studio and just filmed it, really as a document. And that is the film Bankside, which it sort of exists still. When we'd finished that, we started these film parties, and we put all sorts of films on. Everyone bought cushions and things and sat on the floor. And Super 8 would be put on. Sometimes there'd be a whole Super 8 evening. Other people bought films, quite a lot of the then current English underground. So in 1969, just as the year was ending, we gave this party. We invited everyone we could get our hands on. And all sorts of people arrived, including Tennessee Williams. No one invited him. Do you know what I mean? He just happened to be in London and heard of this party, right?